Good morning, folks. It is about 9 o'clock in the morning on Wednesday, the 22nd day of March, 2023. Yesterday, we had a bit of a outage, Spectrum, a bit for 12 hours, but I was still able to upload the video from yesterday morning way late yesterday evening, so I hope you guys had a chance to check that out. I didn't mean to leave you guys hanging, but I just had no means by which to access this BitChute or YouTube or Rumble from my little cell phone. We'll see what's going to happen today in New York. There is talk about people protesting at the courthouse, and there's also talk from talking heads gleefully, hopefully, gonna see a fucking confrontation between the glorious police, the head crackers, and folks who voted the wrong way. The war on populism, I talked about this years ago. There was an article, I think it was Guardian or Der Spiegel or one of those, and it was from Europe, and it was talking openly about this concept of populism being the greatest threat to our democracy, which the definition of populism is doing as the general populists want and what's best for the general population. And that's, according to the powers that be, the greatest threat to our democracy. Not democracy itself, but our version of democracy. So we're going to see how that pans out today, and I'm going to be keeping track of that. And if anything happens, I will let you know as quickly as I can. But until then, I want to talk about what's not being talked about this week because of what's happening with Trump, for one thing. And that is it's entirely possible that President Xi is about to end the conflict in Ukraine and Yemen. And in fact, he's already taken the steps to end the conflict in Yemen. Now, this is remarkable because I covered this shit in Yemen back in 2011, 2010. I wrote a thing called Dancing with Snakes when WordPress erased my fucking website. That was one that was gone, and that was a very good article. And it really explained the situation with what was happening in Yemen back then. This is Obama and Clinton still dancing with snakes, and they're talking about in this article, talking about how they brought him in, convinced him to step down, and gave him so much fucking money that when he signed the deal, this is President Saleh, he's a dictator, it wasn't a president, he was a dictator. He was there for 33 years. We put him in place in Yemen. And he is what, his brutal fucking regime is what the people were protesting against. And they got rid of him. They had to get rid of him. Even though at first Hillary Clinton didn't want to. The Clintons and the Salehs were very close. And over the course of 33 years, and all the fucking business deals done from opening up Yemen and making it available for hot money speculators and our banks and all of these things, and oil interests and Hunt Oil, which had a pipeline running down from Saudi Arabia all the way down right through the middle, bisecting the country. He made so much fucking money. They were one of the wealthiest families in the world. They were on par with Rothschilds and Rockefellers. They were extremely wealthy. And when he was kicked out of Yemen by a popular uprising from the Arab Spring, he was not happy. Hillary Clinton said at first they weren't going to do it. But then it got so bad and there was so much press, he eventually had to step down. That's a picture of him signing the deal to step down. And as you can see from the picture, he's not upset about it. Oddly enough, he was so fucking happy when he signed that deal. He applauded. He clapped. He fucking clapped. That's a guy who, at the time, was one of the wealthiest families in the world. So God knows what the fuck they paid him. But it had to be enough to bring absolute joy to somebody that wealthy. And we tried to keep him in place with drone strikes, cruise missile strikes, CIA death squads. Didn't work. When he signed this deal, it would put his vice president in charge until an election could be held 90 days later. And when that happened, it was a one-person fucking election, which Hillary Clinton said was the fucking pinnacle of democracy. There was one candidate to vote for. Not one candidate per party, one candidate, period. That's how fucking corrupt it has been in fucking Yemen. And that's how fucking difficult Yemen has been all this fucking time. Now, that said, it looks like what President Xi has done with the bringing together Saudi Arabia and Iran has extended to the conflict in Yemen. Iran has promised they're going to quit arming the Houthis. And this article I'll show you in a minute says the Houthi rebels are not the rebels. They were the rebels when Saleh was there, but not the rebels now. They run the country. But they're going to stop arming the Houthis, and they're going to have a talk with them, and they're going to get Saudi Arabia to stop fucking incursions and bombings and drone strikes, and stop allowing the United States from flying drones from Saudi Arabia to attack fucking the Houthis and children in Yemen. This conflict's been going on since 2010. It's actually been going on longer than that. This was the Houthis were in 2009 when President Peace Prize was made president. In 2001, 2008, and 2009 he becomes president. In December of 2009, he killed 29 children with one cruise missile strike. 2 cruise missiles, 1 strike. And they said they were targeting Al-Qaeda on the Arabian Peninsula. They weren't. They were targeting Houthis. Houthis who were mounting an uprising against Saleh. So they had to put them down. And so they targeted one of their base camps. The Houthis weren't there. The ones they wanted weren't there, but their families were. They killed 11 women and 29 children. And it was a massive, disgusting fucking display of President Peace Prizes. True in nature. That's how long this has been going on for us, at least. And of course, it's been going on for longer, but the people of Yemen, 33 years before President Clappy signed his deal and left. So it's been a conflict going on for quite some time, but people think this was a conflict between Saudi Arabia and Yemen. It was not. It was a conflict between us and Yemen and the Houthis because they dared to get rid of our dictator. We got Saudi Arabia. We influenced Saudi Arabia into assisting us. And they took the brunt of the bad press while we sat back and, President Peace Prize sat back and did nothing because we didn't want to taint Barack Obama's name, good name, Peace Prize winning name, with that kind of horror. So it became Saudi Arabia versus Yemen, as opposed to Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama and John Kerry versus Yemen. I don't know what that is. God damn it. Well, if they want me, they'll call me back. Sorry. So, let's delve into the developments. This is what happened with the Chinese brokered deal, upsetting the fucking Middle East diplomacy, and challenges the U.S., challenges our... This is March of the 11th, I believe. And this is when the peace deal was first announced. Finally, there's a peace deal of sorts in the Middle East. Not between Israel and the Arabs, but between Saudi Arabia and Iran, which has been at each other's throats for decades, not true, and brokered not by the United States, but by China. Now, I talked about this before, and one of the things I said about it was, this is going to have a ripple effect. It's going to spread to the entire fucking Muslim world, and there's a lot of Muslim world. Places like Somalia and places like Indonesia and places outside of the Middle East, not just in the Middle East. And another one of these articles, I believe this one here will tell you about that. But so what do we do? What do we do when we see two countries in the Middle East, the most influential from Shia side and from the Sunni side? Shia, of course, Iran, Sunni from Saudi Arabia. What do we do? Well, we unveil new sanctions on the weakest of those two countries, Iran. That's what we do. We hit them with economic penalties for cutting a peace deal, for potentially ending fucking bloodshed in Yemen and making the Middle East a more peaceful location to visit, to take your business. What we do is we hit them with economic penalties for doing that. That is what we do. This is from Foreign Affairs. You're talking about a new order in the Middle East, and that is published today. The link will be down below. On March 6, 2023, representatives from Iran and Saudi Arabia met in Beijing for discussions brokered by China. 4 days later, Riyadh and Tehran announced they had decided to normalize their relations. That's the 11th, and that's the New York Times article I showed you. This landmark agreement has the potential to transform the Middle East and more by realigning its major powers, replacing the current Arab-Iranian divide with a complex web of relationships and weaving the region into China's global ambitions. For Beijing, the announcement was a great leap forward in the rivalry with Washington. This is where it gets really interesting. Listen to this. It was not supposed to be this way. It was the United States that had encouraged Iran and Saudi Arabia to start discussions in 2021 in an effort to reduce tensions between Gulf rivals, advance nuclear talks, and bring an end to the conflict in Yemen. Tehran and Riyadh held 5 rounds of direct talks and informal conversations and continued thereafter. Then, during his visit to Saudi Arabia in July 2022, President Joe Biden urged the Gulf Cooperation Council, an intergovernmental union of Bahrain, Kuwait, Oman, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and United Arab Emirates, to join with Israel to contain Iran. Let me stop for a second. So they were close, but then Israel got involved and said, oh no, we've got to contain Iran. So what does that do to the fucking peace deal? Scrubs it. But the Saudi government instead turned to China, viewing President Xi Jinping as a better mediator with Tehran. Involving China, the Saudis believed, was the surest guidance guaranteed that a deal with Iran would last, since Tehran would be unlikely to risk jeopardizing its relations with Beijing by violating such a deal. She discussed the issue with Saudi Royal Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman during his visit to Riyadh in December of 2022, and then met with Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi in Beijing in February of 2023. Intense discussions between Iran and Saudi Arabia followed, during which the two sides agreed to bury the hatchet and normalize relations. For both countries, Xi's personal intervention was critical. Both have long-standing political and economic ties with Beijing, and the Chinese president was, therefore, able to act as a trusted broker between them. If the deal is fully implemented, Tehran and Riyadh would be closely aligned once more. It was only in 2016 that diplomatic ties between the countries were severed after a mob torched the Saudi embassy in Tehran. Remember, they told you above that, it's centuries. In the other article, they said, it was centuries that this rivalry has been in place. It really hasn't been. But that's interesting. What happened in 2016? This is what happened in 2016. There was a protest because a Shiite sheik, named Namir, was executed by the Saudi Arabian government. He was beheaded because he was supposedly hostile to the ministry. He was beheaded because he was supposedly supporting terrorist movements and Takfiri extremists. So he was beheaded in Saudi Arabia. There was a normal protest because this is a Sunni country executing a fucking Shia sheikh. And so, of course, there were protests, but the protests were peaceful. However, somebody interspersed in that fucking protest people who weren't there to protest, but were there to destabilize. And they threw firebombs at the Saudi Arabian embassy in Tehran, and they made entrance into it. There was some shooting involved. There was some, I don't know if anyone was killed, maybe, perhaps. And they destroyed the fucking embassy. That, of course, inflamed tensions between Iran and Saudi Arabia again, and the peace accord, or the peace that they were working on in 2016, came to an end. You can draw your own conclusions insofar as who sent those guys in to that demonstration. Let's continue. Now, according to the new agreement, both sides will reopen embassies, and the Saudi government will end its support for the Iran International Television channel that Tehran holds responsible for domestic dissent. So their propaganda channel inside fucking Iran, Saudi Arabia is going to stop doing that. Both sides will uphold an April 2022 ceasefire in Yemen and begin work on a formal peace agreement to end the civil war in that country. Iran will cease supplying Houthis with arms and persuade them to halt their missile attacks on Saudi Arabia. In addition, the deal calls for enhanced economic and diplomatic ties between Iran and the GCC countries, and for Iran and its Arab partners to begin discussion on building new regional security framework. By the way, that's already happening. That's already happening. Because Iran and Iraq are in the process of talking and coming to terms on new peace and security deals, which you can see here. One of them involves Iraqi Kurdistan, and they're both taking a very close look at what Iraqi Kurdistan is doing. Iran's on one side. Here's Barzani Kurdistan, stuck right dead smack in the middle of Iran on one side, Iraq on the other. And they're both taking a very close look at what's going on there. So that's one thing that might be influenced. The Greater Kurdistan deal. If you can get Iran and Iraq and Saudi Arabia all to come together Turkey isn't that far out. Turkey certainly isn't that far out. Because Turkey's already made it very clear that they understand what the Greater Kurdistan Plan is, and they want no part of it. Well, Iran's in the same boat, because part of a Greater Kurdistan would involve a major oil-producing region of Iran being handed over to Kurdistan. Iraq has already handed over a bunch of it, thanks to our invasion, and Syria, thanks to what's happened over there since, again, Barack Obama, the thing called Rojava, which is just the eastern third of the country, oil-producing region, has been handed over to the glorious Kurds. So if you start getting Iraq and Iran and Saudi Arabia and Qatar and Oman and Yemen and all these countries to come together and see what's going on for what it really is, it's not that long before they start having conversations and agreements with Syria and Turkey. And you can say bye-bye to Rojava, possibly even Iraqi Kurdistan. Again, don't know that. They haven't said that. They damn sure won't report that in the New York Times. However, that's a possibility. That is a fascinating development. If they can bring an end to something that I've been writing about since 2009, 2010, 2011, that would be a huge step forward in the struggle for peace in the Middle East. I mean, second only to, I think, fucking stopping Israel from doing what they're doing to the Palestinians. But of course, we've got to try to throw a wrench into the deal. We've got to penalize nations for wanting peace as opposed to the war and the constant fucking conflict that our friendship brings. Here is Secretary Blinken, and he's talking about the peace accord that China is trying to broker between Russia and Ukraine.
And a ceasefire now, without a durable solution, would allow President Putin to rest and refit his troops and then restart the war at a time more advantageous to Russia. The world should not be fooled by any tactical move by Russia, supported by China or any other country, to freeze the war on its own terms. Such a move would violate the UN Charter and defy the will of 141 countries who have condemned Russia's war in the United Nations General Assembly.
That's where he gets to use that fucking useless vote. 140 countries. A meaningless vote. Clearly, once again, another conflict that China, President Xi, is trying to put an end to, we can't have. We are just we are the greatest fucking purveyors of violence in the world. And I'm borrowing that. I'm kind of it's not a pure quote. It's not a straight quote, but it's borrowed from Martin Luther King Jr. The speech he gave exactly 365 days to the fucking day they killed him. We are the greatest purveyor of violence and misery the world has ever seen. We cannot stand for the possibility that there'll be peace in Yemen. If that peace doesn't come from us dictating a new dictator to dictate over the people of fucking Yemen. That is the only outcome we will fucking accept. And it is the same with Ukraine. We cannot allow for Putin to meet with Xi and then say, you know what, the plan that Xi put together makes sense. It's pretty good. For a foundational start to a peace agreement, I think, this is what Putin says, I think this is a good fucking starting point. Which is what he says. You know who else says that? Zelensky. Zelensky says that. And Zelensky's going to say that in person in Beijing. He's going to go to Beijing to speak with that man right there, the president of fucking China, to maybe possibly bring an end to this fucking bloodshed that's taking place in his country. Listen, I understand. I know what Zelensky is. He's a fucking sellout. He's manufactured fucking president by Kolomoisky, billionaire, who, by the way, also said maybe we should end this thing, and so then we sanctioned him. This is I mean, President Xi this easily is able to move from one nation to another nation and have these discussions and be considered an honest broker of a peace treaty. Do you know why? Why he can do that and President Biden can't? Because the deals that China cuts with these nations doesn't have anything to do with forcing them upon them our fucking neoliberal system. It has nothing to do with it. Take the deal. Here's a number. Just like when you go out to purchase, to get money to buy a car. One bank offers this. One bank offers this. One bank over here in Washington, D.C. says, okay, yeah, we'll loan you the money, but this is how you got to run your house, and this is how you got to treat your fucking kids, and this is how you got to fuck you. This is what you got to buy. You can only buy Pepsi, and you can only buy this, and you only buy Doritos, whatever the fuck. Fuck you. I'll go to one of these guys. And that's all. That's as hard as it is for President Xi. Now, you can say whatever you want about what his ultimate fucking goal is. I'll get them all to fucking trust me, and then I'll screw them over. Fine, I don't give a fuck. Say what you will. But right now, the stage we're in is, we don't have that trust. We don't have that trust because it really does seem as being pretty fucking obvious that our only fucking interest is keeping conflict alive. That's it. And if we can't keep that conflict alive through normal means, by submarining fucking peace treaties and peace negotiations, then we'll do it by others. And that's what scares me. Because somewhere, someone has been tasked with trying to figure out a way to drive a wedge again between Saudi Arabia and Iran that'll allow them to keep spending money, your taxpayer money, on bombs to drop on children from Yemen, in Yemen. That'll find some way to break up that fucking deal between Russia and Zelensky and Ukraine so we can keep sending our fucking bombs over there for them to shoot and kill children in fucking Donbass. Meanwhile, Russia kills every fucking able-bodied man Ukraine has forced into fighting the war. Someone somewhere has been tasked with that challenge. And unfortunately, I'd have to say, from experience or from what I've seen from here, the people that they usually choose to do these things are pretty fucking good at it. There's an article here, which one was it? I think it was the one from Foreign Policy, that talked about the conflict in terms of the different nations. It's not this one. Well, this is it goes into all kinds of foreign affairs. Then goes into all kinds of repercussions of this. But there is, I think it's this. Is it this? Yeah. Just to keep in mind, we're not just talking about fucking the Middle East. There are Shiite and Sunni fucking nations all across the fucking globe. Bangladesh, Djibouti, Egypt, Jordan, Morocco, Oman, Philippines, Qatar, Somalia, Sudan, UAE, and of course there are a lot of Muslims just right here in the good old US of A. So this peace deal, this peace accord that they were able to broker is historic. And if it brings an end to the conflict, to the unnecessary war in Ukraine, in Ukraine and, of course, Yemen. Both wars of choice, and both started by us. Not by the Houthis. That conflict is over and was over the minute Saleh was signed that paper and took and applauded while he was so happy he was doing it. That conflict was over then. What's happened ever since was by us. Not Saudi Arabia. Us. And the same thing can be said with Ukraine. That was a war of choice, but the choice wasn't made by Russia. It was made by us. And I can't go into that any further. I mean, if you don't already know, the reality is we were sending extra arms into that country in December, before it started off in February. And we told them to shell the piss out of the people in Donbass after they had petitioned the world to recognize them as a separate nation, which, under UN Charter Article 1, the entire world is obligated to do if they have good reason. And the shelling would be considered good reason. We baited Russia into that. Say what you will about the Nazification, say what you will about NATO. In the end, we were shelling. We had fucking Zelensky, and we had the fucking Azov battalion, and we had the fucking National Guard and the army shelling the piss out of the people of Donbass who were begging the world to recognize them as an independent state. And so Russia did what a civilized nation should do, especially when you consider how many Russian-speaking Ukrainians are in Donbass. So yes, these were our fucking conflicts, both Yemen and Ukraine. And President Xi is in the process of ending both of them. This article, it's a good article. You should take a look at it. It's foreign affairs, I know, but if you want to understand your enemy, then you should take a look at how they think. You should try to understand how they think. And this is certainly a fine example of that. When it comes to someone like Tucker Carlson last night, talking about this new planning on arresting another 1,000 to 1,200 fucking people who were at the insurrection of 1/6. You got to laugh whenever you say that. About discussing and looking at how MSNBC and CNN and even to some degree some programs on Fox refer to clearly what happened on 1/6 was not an insurrection. And yet they all have to stick to that fucking narrative. And of course, Carlson is right calling out Republicans who aren't fucking stepping forward in the fucking House or the Senate saying this is fucking bullshit, this is wrong, we're not going to do this, we got to stop it. They seem to be at least tacitly on board with the plan. You ask yourself, how is it possible that they are so fucking deluded in their thinking that they can see an apple and claim to you it's a fucking orangutan, and they fully expect you to agree that this is a fucking orangutan or you're fucking mentally ill, when in fact it's the other way around. And you ask yourself, how is that possible? How is reality such a fucking difficult concept for them? And how long has it been this way? Well, look at the fucking foreign policy. Look at our foreign policy. We talk about spreading freedom and democracy throughout the world, and yet what we spread is violence and insurrection when somebody leans too far to the left or wants to get too close to the Russians or the Chinese. We kill, we maim. We use bloody fucking revolutions, color revolutions, in order to get what we want. So eventually, the chickens come home to roost. The mentality of those people were not removed from fucking office, they have been promoted over the last couple of decades. And what used to be called the crazies is now the norm in Washington. And if you want to remain, the lessons taught to you by Dennis Kucinich and Cynthia McKinney and others, if you want to remain like Bernie Sanders on certain fucking topics, you have to go all in. And those certain topics are the kinds of things that make us sit back and go, what the fuck are you doing, Bernie? Well, there's a reason for that. Washington, D.C. is psychopathic. The whole of Washington, D.C. is psychopathic. And it's only a matter of time before psychopaths turn their fucking rage and indifference toward us. And that's what's happening now. I mean, I don't stand in... I'm certainly not a fucking Trump supporter. However, I do support people's right to vote how they feel. And I think that those votes should be counted. And not on electronic voting machines. And I think that they have a right to gather. They have a right to protest. They have a right to air their fucking anxieties, questions, anger towards the government that supposedly represents them without being threatened the way they were gleefully talking on Morning Joe, threatened by the New York fucking city cops with being attacked by them, beaten by them, and arrested by them. How dare you fucking protest? You'll go to fucking jail if you want to protest. There's a reason that no fucking former president has ever been arrested or indicted. Now, there are many that deserve it. There are many that deserve it. You tell me fucking Barack Obama and George W. Bush and George H.W. Bush and Nixon and fucking Clinton, Reagan don't fucking deserve it. But there's a reason they haven't. This is a transformation. This is a transition. If you get into fucking office and you don't do everything we tell you to do, we'll throw out the fucking formalities, we'll throw out the niceties, and we'll start arresting presidents and public figures for not behaving the way they were supposed to behave while in office. Especially if they're in a situation where they could actually run for office again and possibly win. The mask is off. The kid gloves are gone, long gone. And in order to maintain control, we're not maintaining control outside the fucking borders. God, and now they're damn sure not going to lose control inside the borders. So we'll see what happens. It could be a very interesting time to be an American. We'll see. But I really hope that she is successful in these two endeavors in Ukraine and Yemen. I hope that there's not another 2016 burning of the Saudi embassy planned by some goddamn monster on a U.S. paycheck, U.S. Department of Defense or State Department paycheck. I certainly hope. But we have to keep our eyes open and remain diligent and do the best we can here to call attention to it. Anyway, have a very good Wednesday and keep an eye on New York and see what's going on, and I will do the same. Talk to you later. Bye.